Hi, everyone. I need to especially underline, I think, for this segment, something that some comments that apply to most, if not all, of the things that I make and post on YouTube, and that is that what I'm about to talk about is a bit of a touchy subject to a lot of people, and controversial maybe, and I just want to say that by no means do I posit what I'm about to talk about as any kind of, to say the least, last word on the subject I'm addressing. My forte, for those of you who've seen my other videos, you know very well that my forte is exploration, not so much delivering a completely thought out, tidy, finished, polished, done package. It's not what I do. Maybe I do it sometimes when I have to, but it's not what I'm doing for this video anyway. This is meant to raise questions and discuss some ideas and put some things out there, and then to see what comes back. I like the engagement, and if people have lots of things they'd like to point out, or different points of view they'd like to raise, or critiques of what they feel I didn't understand or I didn't present properly, or whatever it is, I feel that the attention given when I'm working on is I really appreciate it, whatever form it comes in. And if it can prompt me to teach me something directly, or if it can prompt me along a path, sort of prod me along into looking into things more deeply that I should, then I'm very grateful for that. Eventually, if not right out the gate. So there. So this is about looking at perceptions of the introverted feeling function and the extroverted feeling function. I should also say at this point too that I only began learning about the cognitive functions at all as of 3 months ago. So I've got a long way to go in all kinds of different learning about the subject. And so, by no means is this finished. This is just about some things I've noticed and that I'm thinking about. So I know one of the very first excellent materials I came across about the understanding the introverted feeling function better, which is one I have in the auxiliary position as an ENFP, as does the type ESFP. And I remember looking at Michael Pierce's video on that, and it was full. The visuals, it's wonderful videos he makes. The visuals were a lot of like what appeared to be a sniper in the woods, and a lot of wilderness pictures, and it reminded me of the Revenant a little bit, which is a movie I think that should have otherwise been entitled Having a Horrendous Time in the Boreal Forest, man pitted against nature, man against the world. And at first, I really didn't know what he was talking about. I was quite surprised to see this, because I had never been given a framework for considering my own attitude in the matters that are concerned with the feeling functions. And I have to say, I really was quite shocked by that. I hadn't thought about it. So here's a quick rundown. This video is really, most of the contents of this video are intended for people who are already at least somewhat familiar with what these two cognitive functions are about. So I'm not going to go into that a whole lot. There are plenty of other places you can go to learn more about them. But some of the sort of wraps that each, I'll do a little rundown of what some of the wraps are for each of these cognitive functions. Very often, the extroverted feeling function is quite famous for being one that is very concerned with others. It's its kind of natural focus is on the group, how the group is doing, what is best for the group. How is everybody feeling in the group? What would, and sort of ethical and subjective concerns, but as concerns morale and the function, the smooth functioning of a group, all its members together as a kind of unity. And it's very concerned with promoting harmony within a group. And it's got a kind of it's extroverted feeling, so it's got a kind of outward focus. So those that have the extroverted feeling function high up in their cognitive stack, that would be in the auxiliary position or in the dominant position. These are types who have, among their prominent sort of characteristics, are being very diplomatic, being very skilled with helping a group reach consensus, helping to just have a social discourse, run smoothly and to the benefit of the greatest number in it. Although not in a strictly utilitarian, so it sounded a bit too strictly utilitarian what I just said. In philosophy, it's not that, but just very, very concerned with harmony, and among many other things. On the other hand, introverted feeling is kind of famous for being very much self-absorbed, very focused on very individualistic, very focused on the self, the user, the people who have it high in the cognitive function stack of their types, tend to be people who are very, very aware of, they have a strong sense of self, and a strong sense of self as separate from the group. And it's something that is sort of a lens through which they see the world. And how they connect to others. It's connecting over the sort of membrane between them and the rest of the world is how those connections are being made, rather than sort of fitting right into the larger group. And the FI function, as it's known, the introverted feeling, it has a reputation to, in many circles, and depending on the context, for being very raw in its emotional expression. As I said, very sort of self-focused or self-absorbed, of being disruptive at times. The heavy FI users will be people who have always very high up in their list of vital considerations, checking in with, as concerns their decisions, and a lot of their expression. They will always be asking themselves, they will be compelled to ask themselves, how does this fit in with my value system? And that is what FE users will do also. So that's not specific to FI. It's not specific to introverted feeling. But what is more specific to, an emphasis to introverted feeling is the compulsion, the need to, once certain events or a decision has to be made, and the possible decisions that could be made are weighed against the value system. Someone with FI is probably, important, high up in their cognitive stack. They're going to feel compelled to act in accordance with the value system over what the group wants. So it can be disruptive of the group when somebody does that. And understandably, there can be a lot of resentments of that. I think it's understandable anyway. So that's just a very, very shallow, very brief little look at some of the common perceptions about these cognitive functions and their effects in the social world. Now, another source that I came across that I thought that's out there that others can access, and that I will include in the description box below this video, was one that Dr. Mike, in his series NF Geeks with Dr. Mike, there was an episode he did exploring introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling. And he ended up talking about it in relation to these cognitive functions effects in the 4 NF types. And he looked into how the feelings functions interact with the either dominant or auxiliary functions that are the information gathering functions in the types that have the F high up, the FE or the FI. And then looked into, what those effects are communicationally and in terms of what can be seen and can be understood from the outside of the cognitive processing of the people with such and such a combination. And I thought it was just a really terrific video, and it really stuck with me. And I've been trying to. This is just a side note too. I've been trying to find out the source of his ideas in there, which may be his own. I'm not sure. If somebody has any, I've tried to get that information, but have been unable to get an answer so far. So if somebody has can tell me in comments or in private message a sort of authoritative source for the idea that I'm about to speak of, I would really like to know what it is, because what I'm going on here is just saying that I agree with it on a kind of intuitive basis, but it seems to make sense to me. It rings true to me, but I have no more authoritative backup than that. So, and I would like to have more if there is some. So, the idea that I thought was especially interesting that Dr. Mike Buccia put forward in this video was that the upshot of the video was that maybe it's not such a good idea to judge the FE or the FI function or people's major cognitive functions according to the yardstick of its corollary or of the other one, the other function, in this case feeling function, that has a different orientation. I think he's basically calling for before you judge one, for example, before you judge FE, if you're an FI user or you're particularly biased in favor of FI for some reason, before you go and judge the expression of the FE cognitive function as being, say, shallow or expedient or wishy-washy or goody-goody or overly polite or fake. These are certain, I would say, unfair characterizations and just inaccurate characterizations of what FE expression can be. And likewise, for those that are annoyed by FI and don't really understand its usefulness and kind of have a bias against it, some of the things that are said of introverted feeling expression is that it is rude, which I would agree with, actually, by the way. Like, we're using it in the more old-fashioned sense, some long ago edition of Oxford Dictionary of being raw. Well, I kind of think that's a fact. I'll own up to that for sure. It is raw. Emotional expression in people with FI high in their cognitive stacks does tend to be really something to see. It gets your attention, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, I would argue. But we'll get to that. What else about FI? FI also gets a bad rap, again, for being inharmonious at times, for being disruptive, for being selfish, difficult, and so on. And it's kind of easy. Anyway, we'll get into that. We'll get into where those perceptions come from if it's not obvious to people. I'm sure a lot of people find that quite obvious. So, another idea that Dr. Mike introduced in that video that I thought was really interesting and terrific was he was sort of also calling for, I think, a greater understanding on the part of FE users to the FI users and on the part of the FI users to the FE, to sort of say, a good way, it's good to understand that when it comes to having those feeling functions in either the auxiliary position or the dominant, in a prominent position in a type's cognitive function stack, then it's essential to know that, in general, he put it this way metaphorically, that we listen with the functions in the top two positions. We listen with the function that has the introverted orientation, whichever that is, dominant or auxiliary, and that we speak through the function that is extroverted in its orientation. And as that pertains to introverted feeling, for example, what the implication would be for that is that those that have the introverted feeling function very high up, this is something that I think would be, is really useful to sort of understand some of the behaviors that come out of FI when it's being powerfully used. And that is, if we understand that those that have the introverted feeling function quite high up in the stack, what that means is that those people are taking in information they're kind of using it as they're interpreting what's coming in from the outside world using that feeling function. And if this theory is correct, I don't know, but if it sounded right to me. But what he was putting forth, it seemed to make some sense to me. Those of us that have the feeling function high up, and those would be 4 of the 16 types. They would be in the dominant position. Those that have FI in the dominant position are INFP and ISFP, and those that have it in the auxiliary function are ESFP and ENFP. And what that means is that we're taking in a lot of information about the world, and it's coming in and it's hitting us right directly in a really emotionally sensitive place. So that's one big implication of heavy FI use, is that I would liken it to this in a sort of call for greater understanding of FI and heavy FI users. To say that when you see the kind of raw behaviors coming out of those people and intense emotion being displayed sometimes, that it might be useful to think of the fact that what's happening in those cases is that the person it's almost as if when there's like something that is disturbing or upsetting, for example, most people don't complain when I mentioned the negative example, because most people aren't complaining about FI use when although sometimes they are actually. I can still be disruptive even when it's joyous. So it can be too much, du trop. It can be obnoxious to others. It can be upsetting to others. It can be distracting to others. It can be some negative things sometimes, depending on the context. But anyhow, when an FI user is making a big display of emotion in some way that is getting the attention of those in the group, something I think that's really good to know about that is that part of what is driving that expression is that the person is having a certain stimulus that's coming in, and whereas perhaps for someone who's a heavy FE user, if the same stimulus were coming in, it would be coming in and being sort of interpreted by some much less emotionally sensitive parts of that person's cognition. Not to say that FE users don't have very deep feelings. Of course they do. It's just that their expression will tend to be much more moderated than will be those who have the introverted feeling function high up in the stack. So those with the introvert feeling, they will have the stimulus come in, and it's almost as if, like perhaps for an FE user hearing some sort of disturbing information, for example, for them it might be coming in almost as if it were at like volume 6 on a dial. Let's say a dial of, let's say if you have like FE and you have FE very low down in your cognitive stack, this such and such a difficult stimulus coming in, some sort of input, might be at like 3 on the dial. If you're an FE user where the extroverted feeling function is in the auxiliary or dominant position, it might be coming in, maybe the kind of volume that the person is hearing that difficult information at might be kind of like a 7. I don't know. This is a very loose analogy here. But it's very likely that someone who has the introverted feeling function in either the auxiliary position or the dominant function, when they're hearing this like unpleasant, difficult bit of input coming from the environment, the social environment usually, coming in, it's like we're hearing it at volume 12. So one appeal I would make to people who are, understandably annoyed sometimes by the self-absorbed, which Dr. Mike explains very well, and he's like, you're right. He's like, you're very right. It is very introverted feeling. Introverted feelers are very self-absorbed. We have, whether we like it or not, we have a very, very distinct sense of self, a sense of self as separate from the group. We didn't ask for it. We may not have even wanted it, but that's how it is. That's how it is. That's the way how we see things quite naturally and always have. And, not to say that we can't modify things or that we shouldn't, but that to do so will involve workarounds for us in a way that, the FE users don't have to ever bother with. because, they're just good at it. They're good at FE. It's what they do. So, anyhow, so yeah, so these kinds of things, these sort of emotional stimuli they have a very direct and very strong, like we feel them very, very strongly when they're coming in. So that's one thing I'd like people to know about introverted feeling. Another thing I'd like them to know, and this is there's so much more to say about this. I'll be saying more about all these things in upcoming videos, and there's great information out there. Other than anything I'm going to be doing, much, much better, more detailed stuff. But the other thing that in my appeal for greater understanding for introverted feeling is that, just a topmost thing you could say about it. Another thing when you sort of see it in an environment and you're finding it to be very disruptive or irritating or whatever, one thing I would hope you could understand, or that you could sort of put in amongst all your considerations. I'm not saying not to be irritated or whatever. I can totally understand why FI stuff can be very disruptive, and it is, and very annoying to people sometimes, and baffling too for those that don't have this function at all or don't have it anywhere in prominence. So for those people who don't easily relate to it or understand it, and who are tempted to negatively judge it and to kind of think that the world would be better off if it wasn't around, I would like those people to try and think of, among their other things, the other things on their yardsticks that they're judging it by, I'd like them to think about how introverted feeling, by its very nature, with its introverted orientation, it's very, very rich. It's very intense. The experience of it is very intense. I guess that's obvious. Those of us who see the expression of it, but people who see it on the outside of us. But also that a great deal of what it's about and what it's doing, very much like NI, introverted intuition, and all of the functions that have an introverted orientation, an implication for all of them with their introverted orientation is that there is a great deal going on that you will not be able to see, or you will not be able to, there'll be a great deal you won't be able to see at all, and there will be a great deal that you will not readily see. What you're more likely to see with with an introverted function, in the effects of an introverted function, and the feeling function is no different, is that because it's introverted, there's a lot that's going on that is very, very behind the scenes, so to speak. It does not it doesn't lend itself to an easy or facile or surface understanding. Not that any of them do, I'm not trying to imply that any of the cognitive functions do, but let's just say that if a function is introverted, it definitely is going to be harder to appreciate that stuff. You're going to have to you're more likely to see, I think, and I'll go way farther into this in upcoming videos that are focused on different matters, but the thing is, if you really want to see what FI is about, you have to look for what's not there as much as what is. You have to know some special places to look to really get a better understanding of what it's about. And because a lot of it's not going to be obvious whatsoever. But just because it isn't obvious doesn't mean that there's nothing there, or that it's, just running around being a pain in the ass to everybody and for no good reason. Anyway,